sent out today. We've actually started this process as of October 1st and pledged to provide it every 2 weeks. The other thing that I'll say about, well, I want to say 2 or 3 things about this. So first of all, I think one of the efforts here, one of the goals here is to demonstrate to people that this is complicated. It's not just a matter of virus rates. I get many email that say, there are no cases in Hampton or wherever, why aren't kids fully back in school? And I hope that these charts demonstrate some of the complexity given the, as my team has heard me say too often, the math problem that we continue to deal with in terms of how many kids we can put in a classroom and all of those kinds of things. And second of all, this will frustrate some people but I view this first iteration of these plans as a starting point for conversations with our leaders, particularly the leaders in schools where we have where we have a category that's in the red, as we try to figure out what does that mean and what are our ability to work with that red area, or areas quite frankly that are yellow and in some cases are on the borderline of causing us significant problems in those schools. I have to say, because I know on some level to some people this sounds defensive. It's not meant to, but I met with Southeasters again this morning, the superintendents from the southeast part of the state, and no one has the number of schools open for in-person learning that we do. No one. And so I think it's important to keep that at the forefront of this discussion. The Exeter schools, for example, other than one very small school, are all in remote and are struggling to get kids in any numbers right now. And that's true of most of the southeastern part of the state. And we're pretty proud of the work that principals and others have done to bring kids in. And we're obviously interested in bringing more kids in. So I want to show you both of these. In your case, we've split the school in two. In many of our cases, we go with a K-8 measure, but in this case, we've split the school in two, and I want to share those with you. You, Rhonda, have to give me permission to share because for some reason I don't have it right now. I was the host, and then I lost all permission.
You gave up everything. That should fix it.
Okay, it did. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So,
not easy being the host, Bill.
Pardon?
Not easy being the host.
So this is the pre-K to 5 model, but I want to use this one to show you the architecture of this. So we begged, borrowed, and stealed from some other districts. There are very few doing this kind of reporting, but we wanted to make sure that we could do it to talk with people about the issues. So the considerations that we're tracking and reporting on are obviously the community spread, and I'm going to come back to this particular school and then move to the middle school in a second, but I want to show you the characteristics, which we get from DHHS. The positive COVID results within the school community itself, and you know that we have had some communities where this is not necessarily in the green because we've had experience already with that in some of our schools. And there's a difference between the elementary, middle, or the high school, and that's why you see that high school area blacked out on this one. Staff absenteeism and leaves, and this really has to do largely with leave requests, right? Whether they're under the Americans with Disabilities Act or whether they're under the Families First Coronavirus Act, and whether we can actually staff the school for in-person instruction. And we're going to get to that a little bit when we get to the discussion of the middle level in particular. Availability of space, given social distancing guidelines. Do we have enough room available to bring in the students and to socially distance within classrooms or within the building itself? And we're going to talk a little bit about that one as well. And then those are the major characteristics. There are two others, and that is student absenteeism, including requests for remote learning academy. I have been nothing but consistent, right, in saying from the beginning that if we didn't have a number of students who requested the remote learning academy within grade spans where we were bringing students in, then given budgets and the fact that we aren't going to be hiring X number more teachers and we don't have Y amount of more space, then we weren't going to be able to go in person, right? We've hit a sweet spot in some of our schools that has allowed us to do that, but I want to talk about that because that's a bit of a concern. And then lastly is compliance with protections, including screening. And so the conversation I've had with principals is, you know, particularly where we're in person, how are we doing with the safety precautions that are put in place? How are we doing with people completing the app every morning? Those kinds of things. So lesser than some of these other characteristics, but very, very important, because if we can't follow the safety precautions, then we simply can't be there in person. And I want to say in all of our schools that are open, people are doing a great job with that. So let me go back and talk a little bit about the elementary school, the pre-K to 5, and then go to grade 6 through 8, and try to lay out some of the complexity of all this, and then sort of what our next steps are over the next couple of weeks before we publish this again. So community spread, obviously, we're tracking our communities, and we have one community or so, and then Winnacunnet, because it's a larger community that are not in the green, but all of our other communities have a very low rate of transmission or numbers of cases. So the elementary school in the green. We haven't experienced cases within the school or related issues within the school that cause us concern. So again, the pre-K 5 in the green. Staff absenteeism and leave requests in the elementary level, not an issue for us. You know, board members know, because of the joint board discussions that we have, that that's not true in a couple of our schools. And I recognize that your kids go to Winnacunnet, and there may be some parents here who send their kids to Winnacunnet. If you got the Winnacunnet form today, you saw that this is an area that's in the red because of the number of leave requests that we're having to deal with, and trying to figure out how can we work with those requests in a way that allow us to do more in-person kinds of learning, whether it's small groups or whatever, over the next few weeks. But the elementary school, pre-K to 5, not an issue at Northampton. Availability space on 2 levels. First, in order to get pre-K to 5 open, which is a discussion that we had with the board, we originally proposed pre-K through 4. The board asked us to try to do 5th grade. We were able to make that work through parent surveys and providing remote learning opportunities for kids whose parents wanted them to do that. But the elementary school did take additional space, did take spaces that were not normally, did not normally belong to the elementary school in order to make that happen. Secondly, many of those classrooms are near max. In other words, we really don't have room for many more students if students were to move in, or if at the end of the first trimester, students were to indicate, parents were to indicate they wanted their children to come back from the remote learning academy to in-person instruction. That would cause us a problem. That would cause us to have to look at this very carefully, and what strategies we might employ, if any, to make that work, or could it push us into more remote setting even at the elementary school. So that's in the yellow, sort of as that warning to us that's a potential issue for us. And compliance with protections, as I said earlier, has not been an issue for us, with people completing the app, following the guidance that's in place. Terrific job. So let me do the middle and then try to answer any questions that you have. So I'm going to stop sharing because I have to do this. And then I'm going to go over here. Oh, good, I'm there. Just let me entertain myself talking to myself here, and I'll get this up in a second. And now I have the middle level up. Okay. So the middle level looks a little different in a number of ways, and there are some explanations necessary here. So community spread, the same. Positive cases within the school community, the same, both in that green area. Staff absenteeism and leaves, and so I want to say this. This area is categorized as the yellow right now. It could very well be, in further conversations with the school, that this is actually an area that's more in the red. So Susan and I have had some of that conversation. There are some number of leave requests that we're dealing with at the middle level that could make it very difficult. Quite frankly, we didn't pay as much attention to that in this particular initial iteration of this because we knew that space was an issue. But what we're going to have to consider, well, let me go through this and then get to our next step. So that's an area of concern for us that we're going to have to pay close attention to in terms of how do we get more kids in for in-person kinds of experiences. But space, I mentioned earlier, we were very upfront with this prior to opening school, that we utilized a number of spaces that were traditionally dedicated to the middle grades in order for the elementary school for us to bring pre-K through 5 in. And so as an example, I've heard people say today, I saw one email that said, well, we may have to look for spaces outside of the school. And that is part of the work of the next few weeks, to look and say, where else are there spaces available to us? Because one other thing I want to add here, this school and many of our others have done a really great job at creating outdoor spaces. But in the course of the next number of weeks, some of those spaces are not going to be available to us because the weather's going to start to turn. And so we lose some of those kind of spaces. So are there other spaces that we may have to look at and figure out whether we can utilize for school, for students? So that'll be part of that discussion. Requests for remote learning activities in the yellow because we simply don't know. So what we know at the middle level is we can't bring back all of our middle level students. We can't. Same way we couldn't bring back all of our elementary students in this district or others and meet the requirements of social distancing and the number of kids we can put in classrooms and those kinds of things. The same is true in the middle level. The same is true. And we simply don't know because we have very old survey data as to the number that might request some kind of remote learning experience. The question earlier that was asked was a good one, in that our districts are somewhat dependent on one another for these experiences. For example, you have students in the elementary level who are in a remote learning academy that is very Seabrook centric, very heavily Seabrook. And so we were able to work cooperatively across the SAU to make that happen, and quite frankly, to have you in person and them in person and our other districts in person as well. We're going to have to look at that at the middle level in terms of the numbers, because to see what kinds of numbers we could bring back, what kinds of numbers of parents want to remain remote. And this is where your middle and elementary really work hand in hand. Again, at our last board meeting in Southampton earlier today, Dr. Hobbs talked really eloquently about, we asked parents to make a commitment to the Remote Learning Academy, particularly at the elementary level, through the end of the first trimester. So what happens in December if some number of those parents want their kids to come back to an in-person experience and we're maxed out in terms of numbers of seats and staffing and those kinds of things? All of those things are in play in all of our districts. And there is some interdependence, but on an issue like that, it's going to be what are your number of first graders? What are your number of seventh graders, et cetera? And compliance with protections, again, in terms of people being in, that's an area that's been in the green. So what happens with these next? Well, we're committed to providing this information and discussing this information. We did say in the letter that we're going to post these initial results on our websites. We're going to post this video of me explaining them on our websites along with those, and we're going to make a commitment to have them go out 2 weeks from now. But the other piece that's going to happen next week is that we have 3 schools, as you know, 3 areas that are in a remote situation right now. Your middle grades, Seabrook's Middle School, and Winnicott High School, and we're going to really dig in to these results and these data, and try to figure out a timeline, because obviously the next step that people want after they see this is, okay, what is your timeline? What is the plan? And you know that with respect to those leave requests, for example, the FFCRA requests, those for childcare in particular, they go through the first week of December, right? And then that 12-week leave essentially expires. And so unless it's renewed at the federal level. So we're going to try to figure out exactly what those numbers are, because it was a bit of a moving target. We knew they were high in many places, but it was a bit of a moving target. And then what we can do to begin to offer more in-person kinds of, whether it's small groups or those kinds of things at all of those schools. Schools have done a really great job so far of making sure kids with IEPs that have services are getting those, but we want to expand that at all of our schools, the high school and the 2 middle schools, expand it to bringing students in for other kinds of small group activities, as at the very least on our way to more and more in-person activities. So that's the sort of our charge of the next week or so before we publish this again, is to be able to provide a little bit more, even in terms of a rough outline of what some of those timelines look like, and what those kinds of more in-person kinds of activities can look like over time. So that's where we are. Again, the goal was to publish this, right? The goal was to provide this information, to show people what the metric looked like, to begin to provide information off that metric, and to have these conversations in each of our districts about where we are. Again, you know from these indicators that these things can change. I woke up, made the newspaper, so I can say it here. I woke up on a Monday morning 2 weeks ago, and by the end of the day, had 15 students and 5 staff members at Seabrook Elementary who were quarantined. That can happen in a few hours, and will, if the lesson of our colleagues in other districts is any indication of what we will experience. We will experience those things, and we'll adjust accordingly, and we'll adjust this reporting accordingly. But the main purpose of this was to show people that there's a number of different factors to communicate to you, something I know you know because we spent the summer talking about it. But there are a number of factors involved in our being able to bring kids back to school. And quite frankly, as I've been saying since the spring, some of it is a math problem. We have X number of kids who were assigned to a class. We can no longer have that number in that class. We have a smaller number. Can we move? Do we have enough kids who want to request a remote learning environment? Can we provide the teachers for that remote environment in order to bring kids in and bring them in safely? And then do we have the room, the space to do it, or do we need to look at alternatives for space? So that's the exercise, and it will continue. If I learned anything from our Southeasters meeting this morning, it will continue to be our challenge for many months to come.